Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday is UFC 287, Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2. And this card is just stacked from top to bottom with incredible fights. And headlining the prelims of UFC 287, we have Chris Curtis versus Kelvin Gastelum. And this is going to be my full breakdown and prediction for this amazing middleweight fight. And I'm really looking forward to this matchup because not only on paper is this such a stylistically fan-friendly fight, this should be an amazing matchup no matter who wins. It's massive stakes on the line for Kelvin Gastelum. He's dropped a lot of his recent fights. He's pulled out of his last 3 fights due to injury. And now he's in a position where he's almost out of the middleweight rankings. He is ranked currently number 15 in the middleweight rankings. That is crazy. Even though he has fought some very good competition. And now you have Chris Curtis, who is just perpetually an underdog, coming off a big win in his last fight against Joaquin Buckley. And now he gets the first real big name in terms of his UFC career. He has some decent wins, but Kelvin Gastelum would be without a doubt the biggest name on his UFC resume. And Chris Curtis always comes to fight as well. And I just think stylistically, this is an amazing matchup. I think for Kelvin Gastelum, it's absolutely must win for where his UFC career is right now. He may get cut. And also for Chris Curtis, he's getting up there in age. He's in his mid-30s. If he wants to make a run to become a contender, he had that short notice fight against Jack Hermanson, wasn't able to make the most of it. It's now or never. In the middleweight division, depending on what happens with Pereira and Adesanya, Pereira could win and then go up to 205, or Adesanya could win. And then you have Adesanya, who has fought the majority of the middleweight division. And if Adesanya ends up becoming the middleweight champion again, there's a very short list of contenders that Adesanya hasn't already fought. So whoever wins this fight is in a good position in the division. I'm not going to say they're going to go on to fight for a title in their next fight. But if Kelvin Gastelum were to get a super impressive finish in this fight, and then maybe win one more fight after that against a top contender, I think a lot of people would love to see that Israel Adesanya versus Kelvin Gastelum 2 fight. So this is a big fight. This is an exciting fight. And it makes sense in terms of the rankings. So it was a perfect fight. Great matchmaking by the UFC, and I'm really looking forward to it. If you look at the tail of the tape for this fight, you have Curtis is 30-9. Gastelum is 17-8. Curtis is ranked number 14. Gastelum is ranked number 15 in the UFC official rankings. Curtis is 35. Gastelum is 31. Curtis is 5'10". Gastelum is 5'9". Curtis has a 75.5-inch reach, and Gastelum has a 71.5-inch reach. So a 4-inch reach advantage for Chris Curtis. So if you look at Kelvin Gastelum, of his 16 wins, 6 by knockout, 4 by submission, 6 by decision. Of his 8 losses, he's never lost by KO or TKO. He's been submitted twice, and he's lost 6 by decision. Now, Kelvin Gastelum's only 31 years old, but he's been around forever. He's been in the UFC. This April will be 10 years in the UFC. Since April 13th of 2013 was Kelvin Gastelum's UFC debut. He came off The Ultimate Fighter. I actually watched that season, and a lot of people were counting Kelvin Gastelum out. They thought he basically had no chance. He goes on to be in the finals against Uriah Hall, who people were comparing to Anderson Silva at the time, and he went out there and beat Uriah Hall. It was a split decision. It should have went to Gastelum. Gastelum clearly won that fight. But even though he's young, he's been around forever, and his last 3 fights have been canceled due to injury. He was supposed to fight in his last fight, Nasruddin Imavov. He pulled out the week of the fight due to a mouth injury. The fight before that was April of last year. It was unspecified. It was against Dracus du Plessis. He pulled out of that fight. Then last year, also early last year, he was supposed to fight Nasruddin Imavov last year as well, pulled out of that fight. So he hasn't fought since all the way back in August of 2021. So he's been out a significant period of time. The last time he fought was against Jarrett Cannonier. In this fight, I feel like people misremember this fight. This was a very competitive fight. Kelvin Gastelum got rocked badly in the 3rd round. But even with that, I thought Kelvin Gastelum won this fight. It was a very close fight. I had it 3-2 Kelvin Gastelum. I don't remember exactly which rounds I had. I think I had 1, 2, and 5 for Gastelum, but don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure. This was a super competitive fight, and Jarrett Cannonier is still ranked as one of the top guys. And Gastelum's hanging out at number 15 at this point. The fight before that, against Robert Whittaker, April of 2021, just got outclassed against Robert Whittaker. And, he took this fight on short notice. He stepped in for Paulo Costa. He actually took the Jarrett Cannonier fight on short notice as well. Not as short notice as the Whittaker fight, But in the Whittaker fight, Whittaker just proved he is, so much better than Gastelum, lighting him up with combinations. But Gastelum, this was a 5-round fight. Gastelum tried to win all the way up until the bell of the 5th round. He never packed it in. And Robert Whittaker, we know he's one of the best middleweights in the world. His last win was at UFC 258 against Ian Heinisch. Not super impressive. That's back in February of 2021. He just outstruck him, mixed in some grappling. Not an amazing performance. And then before that, he was on a 3-fight losing streak. He got submitted in the first round by Jack Hermansson. He lost a split decision to Darren Till, which I actually thought he could have won, but it was super close, could have won either way. Then the fight before that was against Israel Adesanya for the interim middleweight title. This was a crazy back and forth fight. Israel almost finishes him in the 5th round. And that's a fight I would love to see again one day. I don't think that'll ever happen, but there's a chance that it could. But this was an amazing fight. And if you just look over Gastelum's resume, I know he's got the win over Ian Heinisch. I know he lost to Jack Hermansson. And I know he has the loss to Darren Till. But look at the level of competition he's fighting. Jarrett Cannonier, Robert Whittaker, Israel Adesanya. Those are 3 out of his last 5 losses because he's lost 5 out of his last 6 fights. He's in a tough spot. Before that, he beat Jacare Souza. Michael Bisping KO'd him. Kelvin Gastelum is a guy that even when he loses, it's usually relatively competitive outside of the Whittaker fight. And I know Jack Hermansson, submitted him in the first round, but that fight really didn't get to play out. Kelvin Gastelum's fighting the best guys, and it's not like he's having these horrible performances. And I still think he's a very good fighter. Moving over to Chris Curtis, 30 wins, 17 by knockout, 1 by submission, 12 by decision. Of his 9 losses, he's been knocked out 1 time by submission, and 7 by decision. His last fight was against Joaquin Buckley, where he got retribution for Impa Kasangane. He caught the kick, landed a nasty left hand on Joaquin Buckley, put him down, finished him off with ground and pound. It was a brutal 2nd round finish. That was at UFC 282 in December of 2022. And some people say, Buckley was winning up until this point. I had the first round scored for Chris Curtis because Chris Curtis tends to keep a high guard. Buckley was throwing a lot of output and landing on the forearms of Curtis. And it was a competitive fight, don't get me wrong. But I thought Curtis landed the more damaging shots and won that first round against Buckley. Buckley was having more success in the 2nd round, but then he inevitably got finished in that 2nd round. The fight before that, he lost a short notice fight against Jack Hermansson. That was just a fight where he couldn't get going. He couldn't deal with the range and the movement of Jack Hermansson. 3rd round, he won the 3rd round. He lost, I think he inevitably lost 29-28. But that 1st and 2nd round, Jack Hermansson was just moving well, throwing combinations, backing away, countering, and he just couldn't deal with it. He stepped in on that fight, I think, on 2 weeks' notice. Not a horrible loss to have. Jack Hermansson's a little bit on the decline at this point. The fight before that was against Rodolfo Vieira. Stuffed a million takedowns in this fight and just outstruck him. The fight before that against Brendan Allen, who's now ahead of him in the rankings and looked phenomenal in the Andre Muniz fight. Beat him, TKO'd him. People act in this fight like, Brendan Allen was going to go out there and demolish him. I've never been super high on Brendan Allen. Obviously, they had a super impressive performance against Muniz. But in this fight, it was a very competitive first round. Maybe you could edge it for Brendan Allen. He had his back for a little bit, which is crazy now you think about what he just did to Muniz. But ultimately, the 2nd round, Chris Curtis rips a left hook to the body. Brendan Allen blocks it, and then he comes over the top with a massive right hand, hurts him badly, swarms him, lands some knees up against the fence, and finishes him. And then before that, you have a win over Phil Hawes, and he took both those fights on short notice. He took the Brendan Allen fight on short notice, and he took the Phil Hawes fight on short notice, and he ends up finishing both of them. And he's a guy that a lot of people never thought would really get a chance in the UFC. He gets the short notice call against Phil Hawes, gets the win there, then gets the short notice call against Brendan Allen a month later, gets the win there. But, it remains to be seen. Can he make a run to that top 10 of the middleweight division? He had the opportunity against Jack Hermansson on short notice. He came up short. And now he's fighting Kelvin Gastelum, who, even though he's number 15 in the rankings, I still believe that Kelvin Gastelum is one of the best 185-pounders in the world. And I think this fight is a very tough fight to pick. I genuinely believe this fight could go either way. And I think what this fight comes down to is the activity of Chris Curtis. Because a lot of times, the Jack Hermansson fight, even the first round of the Buckley fight, he'll keep a high guard and he'll land really good quality shots and be very accurate with his striking. But the volume of his opponent makes it seem as if, and the judges normally score it this way, as if his opponent is winning. And Kelvin Gastelum throws a lot of volume. He's very fast. He has great hands, great boxing. And Kelvin Gastelum's used to fighting, guys like Israel Adesanya and Robert Whitaker. Chris Curtis is not a massive middleweight by any means. This is probably one of the smaller opponents that Kelvin Gastelum has ever fought at middleweight. But you also have to factor in the fact that Kelvin Gastelum is coming off 3 injuries. He's coming off basically a year and a half of inactivity. He's lost, 5 out of his last 6 fights, which of course isn't good. So this is one of those fights it's really hard to pick. I think this fight will primarily play out on the feet. I think both guys have incredible gas tanks. I think both guys are very well-rounded. And I think no matter who wins this fight, I don't see either guy getting a KO or TKO, and I don't see either guy getting a submission. I think no matter who wins, this will be a decision win for whoever wins this fight. And for my official prediction, I am going Chris Curtis 29-28 decision. I think it's going to be super competitive. I think it's going to be razor close. I just think Chris Curtis is going to land the better shots. Gastelum sometimes, he has very slick boxing, but, he throws a lot of wild stuff and it ends up missing and he overextends. And I think Chris Curtis is a very good counterpuncher. I think he's still getting better with the striking. His last loss outside the UFC was to Ray Cooper, and that's the only time he's ever been TKO'd or KO'd. So I don't see Kelvin Gastelum putting him away. I don't see Curtis putting Gastelum away, even though Curtis has shown great power. I just don't think Kelvin Gastelum's got a great chin. He's been out for a while. He's going to be refreshed. But, just being on that decline, being out for that extended period of time, coming off of all those injuries, obviously, he at least got his chin refreshed because he hasn't been taking a lot of damage. But I just think Chris Curtis is an excellent counter striker. I think he's going to land the better shots. I could even see him rocking Kelvin Gastelum similar to what Jarrett Cannonier did. But Gastelum has excellent recovery. I don't know if he's going to be able to finish him. And also Curtis just rips to the body nonstop. That's what got him the Brendan Allen, KO. And I think he'll be ripping to the body of Kelvin Gastelum. He'll be ripping hooks. He'll be throwing straight lefts to the body. And then I think he'll mix it up and come upstairs. And Gastelum is there to be hit sometimes, Sometimes he's throwing those wild punches and he's open to be countered. Israel Adesanya did it to him plenty of times. And I just think this is going to be one of those fights that's razor close. It comes down to 3 or 4 big shots in a round that wins a round. And I just think ultimately Chris Curtis is going to be ripping the body. I think Gastelum, he doesn't really mix in kicks a lot. He mixes in calf kicks and leg kicks, but he never really throws too many kicks to the head. He never really throws too many kicks to the body. I think this is going to be like a glorified boxing match, with some kicks mixed in. But I just think ultimately the body shots of Chris Curtis are going to do enough damage to win him at least 2 of the 3 rounds. Maybe Kelvin Gastelum gets the first or second round just based off volume. But I just think Chris Curtis is evolving. I think his jab looked very good in his last fight. And I just think that Kelvin Gastelum, being out for so long, he's going to have ring rust. It doesn't exist for everyone. But I just think being out that long, having those setbacks with those injuries, I just think that Chris Curtis is going to land the better shots and ultimately get a 29-28 decision win. But don't get me wrong, Kelvin Gastelum can win this fight. I could see Kelvin Gastelum winning by Chris Curtis with that high guard. I could see just Kelvin Gastelum lighting up those forearms. And just because of the inactivity of Curtis, I could see Gastelum getting a decision. But I think no matter who wins, it's going to be a decision win. But I am going with Chris Curtis 29-28 decision. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Who are you picking in this fight? Also, make sure you join me Saturday for UFC 287. I will be live streaming the entire card. You can watch it with me. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like the video.